It's the Anime Movie Podcast with your hosts, Kat and Joe.
Hello and welcome to the Anime Movie Podcast with your hosts, Kat.
And Joe.
Oh, that was so much more fun than mine. All February long, we've been talking about Makoto Shinkai films because February is, Valentine's Day. Makoto Shinkai is all about love and relationships and making movies about it. So we're wrapping up this month of Makoto Shinkai with the 2004 film The Place Promised in Our Early Days. I guess the English translation directly from Japanese is actually Beyond the Clouds, The Promised Place. And this film is written, directed, storyboarded by Makoto Shinkai.
Yeah, I think this is his feature-length debut.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's his first time out for feature-length film. And he was kind of one-man banding a lot of it, it sounds like, as far as the sort of creative direction goes.
Yeah, from what I read is he originally intended to do a lot more too, but I think he just got kind of overwhelmed with a lot of it and had to outsource his background painting to other people. Because that's usually one of the staples of a Shinkai movie is like the intensely gorgeous backgrounds and very detailed and very just like, whoa, when you see them, they pop, you know?
Yeah, and he does a lot with light that is really beautiful. And of course, all animators deal with light, but he deals with it in this really sort of like fanciful and beautiful way. You'll just look at one of his backgrounds, you'd be like, oh, yeah, I have seen light do that before. And it kind of takes on its own character in the film. This film, you can kind of tell that it's some of his early work because you can see the ways that it really influences some of his later work. And it's also got, I was trying to think of a word earlier and I couldn't think of it because primitive isn't the right word, but there's the style of this is more simplistic.
Yeah, I wrote that down as soon as we started this. It's very early Shinkai. You know, you can see where he goes from here, but I felt like the animation was a little bit. It was not as smooth as his later. But it's also his feature length debut, so you got to cut him some slack, I guess, with the animation and everything. He didn't have the budget that he does now, like
Sure.
with Weathering with You and those massive budget ones where it's just like, dude, this is insanely beautiful.
Yeah. Like
But
some of the backgrounds are still pretty nice, not the level of detail or realism that you see in some of his later stuff. Like still great. But the animation is more like 1994 anime. The sort of character animation is more like 1994 anime.
yeah, this is one thing that you say about when we sometimes watch JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is you say that the motion in the show, it looks like there's frames missing and it's just kind of like janky and it's jittery. That's what I thought about this film's animation with the characters.
Totally agree.
Yeah,
I think it's smoother than JoJo.
You thought that this was smoother than JoJo?
Yeah,
Wow, okay.
for sure. But I think that this is also more consistent, and JoJo kind of switches between styles of animation and movement, which for me is a little bit more jarring. But I totally picked up on that as well for this, that it does look like that, or kind of you see a character walking across the scene and it doesn't really look like they're connecting with the scene around them. You can kind of tell that it's a cell over a background. Kind of like when you're looking at hand drawn against CGI, but this looks almost entirely hand drawn to me. Did you see anything about what the animation was like, if there was any CGI?
Oh, there's loads of CGI in this.
Yeah.
Did you not? Like
Some of the
a lot of the
light-
transport material, the transport vehicles, all of those are CGI. Like the plane was CGI.
Oh yeah, the way the plane moved, I can see that.
Yeah, the plane was definitely CGI. Some of the trains were CGI. And that's just like a common thing. I feel like in anime, the vehicles are all CGI for some reason. I don't understand why, but yeah, there's a lot. And I think that tower, there's a big tower that takes that's a big MacGuffin in this movie, I guess. And when we get closer to the tower, that's definitely CGI too.
But the tower's not doing anything. How I don't understand.
Look,
Why?
look,
It's just a straight line. What do you need to put that into computers to generate?
I have no idea.
Is that but you read that the tower was
No, I just noticed it while we were watching it. We'll have to discuss more in spoilers
Yeah.
because it's more of a spoilery thing that I noticed.
We'll have to talk about the animation again because we'll need
Yeah.
to cut that out.
But I mean, this has a lot of the what I would consider like Shinkai staples. A lot of inner monologue, a lot of poetic inner monologue. The background scenery is really dope. Dude loves skies with huge clouds, big blue skies,
Hmm. And trains,
and
train
trains.
travel.
Oh my God, boy, does this guy love trains. So many trains. I mean, we've done, I think this is all of them at this point now. We've done
Yeah.
all of his movies. And yeah, all of them, a lot of train travel, a lot of deep inner thoughts.
And most of it's sort of on some level melancholy romantic stories.
Oh,
I feel
yeah.
like later on in his films, like in Your Name and in Weathering with You, he gets more of a sense of humor. So
Mm-hmm.
the movies become a little bit more fun, even though there's still, this sort of romantic attachment that's really strong, and the story kind of centers around that relationship and the loss of that and mystery around it and all that. But like 5 centimeters per second and the place promised in our early days is just almost entirely humorless,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. I think Shinkai was like going through it when he wrote these two movies. He
Yeah.
must have been like just gotten dumped or something because this is just, and I have to admit, I fell asleep a couple times during this movie when we were watching it because it is just there's not a lot of action going on. There's not a lot of music going on. It's just a lot of I felt like also a lot of the voice actors sounded the same.
Hmm. I mean, I do think that it was very violin heavy in the soundtrack
Mhm.
in sort of the first section of it. And then you get a section where you don't get a ton of music, but then suddenly you get a lot of action. So I think the pacing of this film was really strange. I
Mm.
think that this film has the bare bones of something that could be very, very good.
Yeah.
I think there's some interesting ideas in the plot, and that I might talk about this a bit more later when we talk about spoiler stuff, but I kind of feel like this would be a great premise for a Marvel film. Like if somebody watched this and they happen to be a screenwriter who wrote Marvel movies, that this could be a very fun premise for something.
Can do you want to do a spoiler-free synopsis of this movie?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this while we were watching it and how it would be challenging to do.
Yes.
Um, because you either say very, very little and almost nothing,
Uh-huh.
um, or maybe you spoil a little bit too much. I will say that this film, I would describe it as a romantic, melancholy sci-fi mystery.
Okay. The reason why I asked you if you wanted to do a plot synopsis of it is because I kind of am very unsure about what's going on in this.
Okay. Um,
I read a plot synopsis of it. I read a couple of them before we started recording, and I'm still like, okay,
okay.
yeah, that sounds like what happened in the movie, but there also seemed like there was so much more happening in the movie.
Yeah, so essentially this film explores the idea that there is a alternate timeline where things went differently. And normally this happens with like, oh, what if Germany and Japan won World War II?
Mhm.
Or when we were watching like Kiki's Delivery Service, it's, what if World War One and World War II never happened?
Mhm.
But this film is more like, what if the Cold War happened and then the Soviet Union became this huge superpower
Mhm.
instead of the US? and now they're kind of controlling half of Japan, and the northern part of Japan and southern part of Japan that's controlled by the Soviet Union are sort of at the brink of war. They're experiencing a cold war and it might erupt into a real war. And this is like a couple years after the Soviet Union would have fallen
Mm.
officially, because the story focuses on three middle school kids, and they're in middle school in like 1996.
Mhm.
So that would have been just 2 years after the fall of the Soviet Union. And it starts out very much like a lot of kids' books do, where it's like three friends that are kind of dreaming big and they have an idea about a place and they have some magical ideas about it and they concoct this idea to try and get to it. And the two boys, Hiroki and Takuya,
Mhm.
are sort of prodigies. They are incredibly smart and they find this old airplane and they're trying to fix it up to make it fly again because they're really interested in getting to this tower that they've always seen in the distance, which is something that was built by the Soviet Union. And it's on this sort of line that separates the north and south
Okay.
of the island. And um, they both have interest in a girl who spends time with them that summer, and they invite her to come along and do this journey. And then later, Takia is kind of looking back, and we kind of find out that something mysterious might have happened to the girl. Maybe they never flew the airplane. Um, and
Yeah, something mysterious happened to the girl Sayuri, and for some reason they haven't seen her for 3 years, and they stopped working on their airplane. So their plan to go visit that mysterious tower has kind of just fallen by the wayside, and they've all kind of moved on with their lives. And yeah, and there's like war going on, and then there's also research into this parallel universes type of thing, and they're trying to connect the parallel universes and explore that. And it's just when they were explaining all of that and that story was happening, that's when I dozed off a couple times.
yeah, yeah. Um, I don't know. Do you want to move into spoilers now? I'm not sure I've got
Yeah,
too much more to say. I kind of want to dive into some of the details.
sure, yeah, we can get into spoilers if we because I don't really have anything else to say that's non-spoilery. Do you?
No?
All right, well then, how amped are you about the place promised in our early days? I had to
I
keep
was
looking
like,
down because I've been fucking up the name of this movie. Before we started recording, I just kept saying I called it by like 15 different names.
that reminded me of just like awkward teleprompter reading. Like somebody in the audience stood up and you're like, oh shit, they covered a word. I can't see the teleprompter.
So what is your feelings on hold on, let me um the place promised in our early days.
I'm actually kind of amped to talk about it because I think there's some interesting things going on here. On the whole, as a movie, I think it falls short of something for me, but I think there's some interesting talking points.
I'm less amped than you are, I believe.
Yeah,
I mean, I give Shinkai full credit for what he's become, but obviously this is his first
but
movie.
no credit for what he
Yeah,
was.
but exactly. I guess I mean if you look at any director's first feature film, I think that there's not going to be it's not going to be a home run, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I this also in some ways felt like when you read a poet's poem that they wrote when they were 17,
Mm.
and even if it was good for when you were 17, they'd be like, "Oh god, don't look at that." Like, can you imagine having a conversation with him and be like, "What was the problem with like blah blah?" And he's like, "Are you kidding me? I made that in 2004." Like I kind of feel like in some ways it's like a moot point because this is almost a practice run. So I think it's more interesting to talk about the ways in which it was good or the points that it had that I think would be so much more interesting to explore in a different film.
You can see where he started from, and like all of his influences are in this movie. There's some scenes in this that look exactly like scenes from Your Name or
Yeah.
Weathering with You or some of his later works. And you can see where all of that, the genesis of his style and his storytelling
Yeah,
techniques.
exactly.
But that doesn't necessarily make this a great movie.
Yeah.
Spoilers?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's spoil it.
They wouldn't spoil this, right?
Oh,
You
God!
can't spoil this.
Please
Right?
don't.
No
Spoiler
talk. Spoiler talk. Anime movie podcast spoiler talk.
All right.
In the spoiler room, we got spoilers on our Honda Civics, and we're about to race to the finish line.
So I think maybe we could go through sort of a synopsis of what the different parts of this were, the
Yeah, it
way it was
seems.
broken up.
Yeah, there seems like it's kind of like 5 centimeters per second, where it's broken up into 3 parts. It seems right.
Yeah, I mean, 5 centimeters per second, though, has this like sequential thing that makes sense where it's three parts of his life that are separated by a certain amount of time. But I feel like when you go into this film, he starts out at a certain time and you hear his inner monologue and you hear him talking about the past. And then you kind of feel like you're flashing back into the past. And then you spend time with him as a kid, as a teenager. But then there's times where it kind of feels like it goes forward in time for a second.
Mm-hmm.
There's this funny blend, and you get it also with reality and dreams, where you're not quite sure that you're in a dream until you're like, "Oh, wait, I'm in a dream." And there's a couple moments like that too, where you're not quite sure what time you're in, as far as the story is concerned.
I agree, and even though they try to make it clear with their title cards, it's like 3 years later, 1 year later, the next March. Even within those like 3 years later, they'll have flashback scenes, and the timeline in this is just like all over the place.
Yeah, it is, which is one of those things where I feel like somebody would read this script and go, "Dude, you've got some great ideas here,
Mm,
but you need to work on some of your storytelling. Like,
yeah.
you shouldn't be bouncing around so much. You know, why do we right here just like skip a year? Like, you need to have that be a little bit more motivated,
Mm-hmm.
for that to happen." Um, I guess he just hates montages, you know?
Um, no, he doesn't. He loves montage. Well,
But
he has grown to love
not
montages.
to show the passing of time, though. You know, like, somebody could show a year going past by,
Yeah.
like, showing the 4 different seasons happening, and then you'd be like, "Okay, a year has passed." But he loves putting up a title card that says, like, "This amount of time."
I don't know. In Your Name, it seemed like there was like 3 montages that were music videos
Yes.
montages. I think that there was kind of a similar thing in Weathering with You. So maybe he took notes from this movie
Yeah.
and was like, all right, maybe the title cards thing is not a very good idea. It seems like people are being confused. Let me enlist the help of this band Rad Wimps to
I was really
score
grateful that he hadn't found them yet.
yeah, to score every one of my movies.
Yeah, I mean, Weathering with You had that weird, like, 3 years later.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah, when Japan was underwater or
Yeah,
whatever.
that whole thing.
Yeah.
Um, remember, guys, this spoiler is
We're
section is for
spoiling everything.
everything. Nothing is safe after the spoiler
Yeah.
section.
Jack dies in the Titanic. Boom.
Shocking.
Bruce Willis was dead the whole time.
Um, yeah, so I think when they start out as kids, it feels very much like a kid's book. Like,
Hmm.
it reminds me a lot of that sort of that general plot where, kids aren't on the internet, they're out exploring and doing things and coming up with, creative stories about things.
Finding
Um
drones, building airplanes, like we all did.
Some of us made paper boats and put them onto a river or
Yeah,
something
got
just to
eaten
litter.
by clowns. Another spoiler.
um, but there's this moment where Sayuri is with Takia on the train platform, and it's before she goes with him and sees the airplane for the first time and all that. And he says to her that he's interested in physics, and so he's kind of reading up about it. And she's like, "Wow, that's amazing." She's, like, super amazed by it, and then says that her grandfather is, or was a physicist, is a physicist, And he's like, "Well, I mean, that sounds more amazing than just having an interest in physics," which is a very fair point.
Yeah.
We find out later that her grandfather designed the tower,
Yeah.
and the tower is something that was built as kind of a needle point to be able to take in energy, to be able to kind of tap into different parallel universes, parallel worlds.
Yeah, and it seems like it's powered by Sayori's dreams or something?
Well, we kind of find out later that from the female scientist who also thinks that the antennas on a building are amazing. I just turned to Joe and I was like, the women in this film are amazed by odd things.
Yeah.
Um, but
Easy to impress.
and I think her name's Maki,
Yeah.
and she explains that her research has to do with dreams and premonitions, and it all centers around this idea of these parallel worlds. And she's trying to explain it and says that just like we dream when we fall asleep, that the universe also dreams.
Mhm.
And and these dreams is what sort of creates deja vu, is what creates precognition and premonition.
Yeah.
And there are people who are really sensitive to it and are able to kind of tap into it, which I was like, very interesting idea.
Yeah. They also even break up like a diagram where it shows how the different dimensions and parallel universes can split off, and some of them turn into dead ends
Yeah.
and all that stuff, which is kind of vaguely Steins Gate world lines
Yeah.
theory type of stuff, which I thought was pretty interesting. And I
I
was
could
like,
see
"Oh,
that.
okay, well, I'd rather be watching Steins Gate right now."
And I don't know if it has something to do with the fact that her grandfather designed the tower that makes her connected to it, or if he's one of these people who's also sensitive to this precognition or premonition and the dreams that kind of come out of the dreams of the universe.
Well,
But it,
they kind of hint at that it could be that she's linked to it because her grandfather designed it, right?
yeah.
Yeah, I remember hearing that and being like, "Oh, okay, well, that's interesting."
Yeah, and I mean that maybe he also had a similar power as she does,
Yeah.
and it runs in the family or something. Um, but essentially, that's getting kind of more and more unstable or more and more powerful, and as it does, she's taking on more and more of these premonitions and precognitions and dreams as all of the stuff is getting much much stronger, and it gets so intense that she stops being able to wake up.
Yeah.
So she's kind of in a dream-filled coma. But before that, you have all these moments where, I mean, the first line of the film, the first line of the film, Hiroki is saying something that Sayuri had said to him about a dream that she'd had.
Mm,
I think it's about having lost something. Do you remember?
no. I've lost something. All memory of this movie. I'm so sorry. You're really gonna have to like
Carry this one?
you're gonna have to you're pulling the weight on this one
Okay.
because I'm so much of this was confusing to me, and I got lost at certain points, and obviously I fell asleep. So I missed out on some of the stuff. And other stuff I was just like, I don't know where this is going or why this character is acting like this.
Right.
And then I just was kind of like, after a certain point, I just checked out and was just like, well, I'm just going to see if I can piece this together. And it's been rather unsuccessful.
So the last day that these kids spend together before Sayuri disappears, as far as they're concerned, or as far as the boys know, they don't realize that she falls asleep.
Hmm.
She kind of has a waking premonition, a waking dream. So you can kind of tell that her reality and dream world are starting to become pretty blurred, that
Hmm.
line. And she even says, like, after it happens to her, she's like, "Oh, I had this dream really briefly." And they're like, "What?
Yeah.
You were awake."
You
um,
almost fell in the water, and then you did.
but she has this premonition at the end of the film, which is that tower blowing up. And then, the sort of air ricocheting off of it, the energy ricocheting off of it, and then the plank of wood that she's kind of sitting on snaps, and then she reaches to grab on to stop from dropping into the water. And then she wakes up, and that's actually what's happened, is that she's holding on. I was gonna say holding on for dear life, but it's just holding on for dear dryness so
Yeah.
she doesn't drop in the water. Although rivers can be pretty shallow, so
Yeah. It didn't look like she was that far from the water,
maybe
no.
15, 20 feet.
Oh, really? You think that far?
That's what I thought.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, the premonition that you had too is of the tower being exploded, right? I remember that
Yeah.
part. I remember being like, "Oh, okay, this is drama. All right, I'm in."
And I found that really interesting.
Yeah.
And I think that when it kind of shifted tones, uh, going into sort of 3 years later when these middle school kids look like full-fledged adults in the working world for some reason, I was like, "Is it only 3 years later? What's going on?" Um, but the idea is so Sayuri disappears and Hiroki takes it really badly. And he moves to Tokyo and he ends up going to a high school there. And but that high school seems like college. I don't really understand.
Yeah, I thought at the beginning of the movie they were in high school and then they were in college, and
It
then when they
felt
were
like that.
saying then they were like, "Oh, we're in 3rd year of high school." I was like, because previously when they were in middle school, they were working on a military base, like, building drones and shit, and then they were
Yeah.
stealing parts to build their own airplane. I'm like, "How fucking genius are these
Like
kids?
I know they're
They're
prodigies, but
building their own airplane? They're working for the military, building instruments of war? How intense is this childhood?" Like, it's just
and here's the thing with my Marvel movie theory that this would be an amazing Marvel movie. I think that that whole section of it would have taken the first 15 minutes of the movie, and it would have been the backstory for Sayuri's, like, superhero persona.
Mm.
So, she ends up being a superhero, and you find out, like, that this was her childhood, and she'd hoped to get on this plane, and what are you doing? You're doing so many distracting things.
I was sniffing the microphone.
It's really hard to imagine you're listening to me while you do
I'm
that.
listening. This is
Okay.
Sayori's origin story if it were a Marvel movie, and now she gets her superpowers.
Yeah, so it seems kind of like this could have been I
I'm sorry.
have to edit this.
I have to take my jacket off. I was getting a little hot, and then
And then bothered?
the zipper kept slapping on the chair, and I could hear it, and it was bothering me,
Okay.
and so I zipped it
So
so
I
it wouldn't
started
do that.
smelling the microphone.
Okay.
It tracks. Um, right. So I feel like this could be Sayuri's cool origin story of her superhero character. And then that kid that she had this connection with after, well, that she had a connection with before she falls into this superhero origin story coma,
Mhm.
where she's magical dreaming about parallel universes. Then later on in the movie, that guy would come up as a character and it'd be like, oh my God, I remember you.
Can you tell me your name?
Oh, geez. Um, but it would have all the same elements that this explored. It would pace it out very differently, and I think that it would do something very differently once it delved into that 3 years later time when you suddenly have this, like, ticking clock of the upcoming war that's going to break out, and at some point, they're like, "We only have 5 days until war is declared," and it's like, "How do you know?
Yeah.
How do you know that war is gonna get declared?"
Well, wasn't it also that her dreams are somehow powering the tower, and that is what's making the parallel universes so close together and tangible to them then?
Kind of. They said that if she became conscious, that the power of the tower would become overloaded.
Mm.
So she was kind of acting like a grounding, if what do you call it? Like on an electrical plug when you have the The grounding. No?
I have no idea.
You don't know?
I don't know. I have no. I can't even fathom a guess. Look, I know a lot about a lot of things, but that's one thing I don't know.
Okay, well, you know how sometimes on plugs you'll only have 2 prongs, and then
Mhm.
sometimes you'll have the 3-prong plug?
Mhm.
The 3rd prong is for grounding,
Mhm.
and it's usually for heavier electrical devices.
Okay.
If you especially if you don't have one of those, like, boxes that, helps it deal with the amount of electricity it's, handling. I don't know. I'm now just speaking in metaphors. Um, and essentially, she's acting like that for the tower.
Okay.
So while she's asleep, she's able to kind of like suck up all this extra energy that's happening. And when she wakes up, it becomes really unstable, and all of the alarms go off in the
Yeah.
scientist monitors.
Yeah, the scientist dude makes it seem like she needs to stay asleep and she needs to keep dreaming, and if she wakes up, the tower's gonna blow up and it could destroy the world, or at least the country that they're in.
They did make the stakes sound high,
Yeah.
about that high, about world destroying high. Again, feels very Marvel movie.
Yeah, exactly, and there's, the blue beam of light coming from, which is the tower,
Yes.
and then, all the jiggly jello that looks like it's inside of the tower, which whatever that was.
Sure. The glowing gel of some
Yeah.
kind. Um, Hiroki during this time becomes incredibly depressed.
Yeah.
One of the saddest descriptions of depression I've ever heard. I mean, first about like how his own bones hurt in his body, but then how he would go to a train station and pretend to be waiting for somebody until he couldn't stand doing that anymore, and then he would walk slowly home.
Yeah.
Really slowly, to take up the time so that he'd spend less time being alone in his apartment, but he was alone, his soul was alone,
Yeah,
everything was loneliness.
and that was, like, so depressing, and then when he kept going with, like, the depression, I was like, "Alright, I get it, dude, like, you're depressed." He's like, "In a city where there's 30 million people, I feel like I don't know a single one of them, and yeah, I go to high school and I
I'm so
know people there,
lonely.
but, I don't wanna talk to them after I go home from high school." And just like, "Dude, give it a rest. Fucking see a therapist. God damn, don't unload this on me, the viewer."
Don't unload this on your own inner monologue.
I mean, he's just so depressed over not being able to see a girl, and then, like, why did they have to stop the plane thing? Like, how long did they go? This is my question, is
Uh-huh.
they gave up on the whole plane situation because they didn't see Sayuri for 3 years. It's like, how long did they go without seeing Sayuri? It was just like the next day she didn't show up, and they're like, "Fuck it. Fuck our dreams. No more plane. We're done with this. Sayuri didn't make it today." Just
Well, I think you could, you know, get to a point where it's like, well, we won't do it until she's back,
Mhm.
and then she doesn't come back, and then they end up going to different schools and they, you know, part ways.
Yeah.
But I feel like I almost would have bought that more if it didn't feel like Sayuri was a brand new addition to their little crew.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know. There could have been something more there, something more, or something less, just something different.
There needed to be something. I'll give you that. There needed to be something.
Yeah. And we haven't talked about what happened to Takia, who becomes such a dick.
Yeah.
He kind of becomes this almost villain character who then suddenly isn't a villain anymore at some point.
Yeah, it seems like he got a high position in the government where they're studying these parallel universes, and he's like the head new guy, I guess. Still in high school.
The head new
Look.
guy.
Look. Come
The
on.
head new guy at
He's
the
the head
sciency
new
place.
he's the head Yes. Stand by that.
All right, continue.
So he's the head new guy at the science place. He's a high school student, examining parallel universes that could fucking destroy the world, and he's just, like, tapping on his computer. He's like, "Ta, ta, ta, ta," and everyone's like, "Oh my god, Takia's the smartest guy ever."
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot of that.
Glad we hired him as head new guy. But, he's really, like, delved into his head new guy position, and he's just climbing the military corporate ladder, it seems, and he's just, like, really invested in that parallel universe thing and trying to connect the parallel universes, and,
To what
as
end? We're not really sure.
yeah, I'm not sure what the purpose of it was,
It
what was
started
gonna
feeling
happen.
it started feeling very mad science-y.
Yeah, and then, it seems like
Or was it like a space race where it's like they're trying to beat the Russians to being able to tap into these other worlds in the same way as like in the 1960s they were trying to be the first to land on the moon, you know?
yeah, I'm not
That kinda makes
sure.
sense.
It would make sense if it was, like, some kind of Cold War-y thing that was a continuation going
Yeah,
on, like, just because the Cold War is, quote, unquote, "over" doesn't mean that there's still not, like, rivalries and people still secretly Cold Warring, you know?
sure. It's not gonna get colder.
Yeah. It's gonna get to absolute Kelvin or whatever, absolute
0,
0,
0 Kelvin.
0 Kelvin.
Absolutely no molecular movement.
Yeah, I'm wasted.
Yep.
I'm wasted right now. Um,
And he vaguely has a love interest, maybe in Maki.
mhm.
Because I mean, somebody accuses him once of spending a lot of time with her, and he says that it's nothing like that, which I think in anime means that it is like that.
Yeah. I don't think there's ever been a time in any anime where someone's like, "Hey, I think you like that person." They're like, "Yeah, I kinda do." Like, every time that suggestion is brought up, they're like, "What? No, no,
Yeah.
no, you just do just
He's about to start beatboxing. Just beginning of Doug.
Day
Uh,
bow bow.
I I have also picked up on this, um, mainly because you've pointed it out to me so many times, and it's not something I'd ever really thought about before, um, and I guess it's because when I first started watching anime, I was of the age where kids act like that,
Mhm.
and I think as you get older, it becomes less of a big deal, but it made me think, is it inappropriate in Japan to talk about those sorts of subjects? And that's why people get really flustered and start to blush. But then you'd think if it was inappropriate or rude or impolite or whatever, embarrassing to talk about culturally, you'd think it'd be rude, embarrassing, etc., to ask about it
Yeah,
or
or
to
suggest.
accuse.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
you'd think that would be just as bad.
I think that you're onto something with it being uncouth to bring up because, I mean, that's partially why, and this getting into like some real world stuff, like the Japanese population's like dying off.
And I have some theories. It's because they won't admit that they like each other.
Exactly, exactly.
Mm.
No, but for real, like they have one of the oldest populations, and they're not reproducing at a rate to fill up their population anymore, and so they're kind of dying off, and it's very weird, and it is, I believe, because of some of those norms,
Mm.
and, yeah, I believe I studied that in college, but that was also, like, 10 years ago at this point, but and
They could have
also
made a real big comeback by
and
now.
also sex robots. That I'm not fucking around. I'm not that's, like
That's why I'm laughing.
that's legit science.
Sex robots is legit science, or you mean that having sex with robots is less likely to make you reproduce is science?
And it's the men in Japan are more likely, or they're leaning more towards just getting sex robots as opposed to trying to court a woman now.
That kinda reminds me when people say like, "Oh, like, now that men can have access to porn, they're desensitized and they don't want relationships anyway, and they just wanna wank and watch you
Wank.
porn." or whatever. But I think a lot of men still like having actual sex.
Oh yeah, not the Japanese men though.
According to Joe Welke, folks.
That's sociology talk with Joe. Look it up. We'll look it up after this. I gotta sneeze. Hang on.
You need to go blow your nose. So, one thing that I got very slightly confused about was that these guys used to work, like you said, on drones in this sort of big hangar. It was kind of a summer job.
Mm-hmm.
And their boss is this, like, I don't know, kind of a,
Mr. Okabe.
yeah, he's kind of tough, greased elbows, smokes a cigarette all the time.
No nonsense, tough love kind of guy.
Yeah, there we go. And he somehow ends up sort of being involved with the government.
Yeah,
And
this is the
that's
part.
when things broke down a little bit for me and I got
Yes,
confused.
I'm with you on that so much because I didn't know what his role was, and he's like pulling guns on people.
Yeah.
I didn't understand like the war side of this. There was so much going on with, there's parallel universes, which is explore that some more. That's a really interesting.
Absolutely.
There doesn't need to be a war on top of it and a love story and two characters that have gone their separate ways. So we have to see where they're at now. It's just like, and then the girl who's in a coma and we're seeing flashes of her dreams and everything. It's like, there's so much and you just can get buried under the weight of all that story. They
Well,
need to
what's
simplify it.
yeah, what's interesting is that I both feel like this movie was too long and also should have been longer.
Yeah.
Because I think it could have been a 2-hour film if it and be very, very good if it explored some of those areas a little bit more and toned down some of the other things. I think I guess they have this big plot point of Sayuri wrote a letter um to the boys and she sent it to Okabe's like hangar
Hmm.
in order for them to read it and explaining like sorry, I have to go to sleep now forever. But it never reaches them because she kind of ends up being part of the government experiment.
Hmm.
And but then Hiroki does get the letter, but it's like posted through just his apartment, and Okabe is I guess friends or in touch with one of the other scientists that Hiroki works with
Hmm.
who has, information about Sayuri.
Well, I think that Okabe is friends with the scientist that works with the other one.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to say Hiroki. I meant to say
Yeah,
Takia.
yeah, yeah. To your point, to your earlier point, though, this movie was supposed to only be 60 minutes,
Okay.
and then it kind of got ballooned to 90. I don't know why, and I don't know what was added. I don't know what the extra half hour that was added, but I would have liked to have seen the 60-minute version of this movie
Yeah.
to
I
see like what did he add that he felt like this was necessary for this movie, or maybe he just needed to fulfill a time limit thing for maybe to like submit to festivals or something. It's like, hey, we only accept 90 minutes. It's like, oh yeah, well, I got a fucking here's a story about a war.
I don't think the war was that out of nowhere, especially because they set this up as an alternate universe that has to do with wars happening or not happening or going differently. So the idea that that's building up to a different war, it's this kind of like it was always going to happen in one way or another, and this is how it happened.
Hmm.
Um, so that didn't bother me too much. What bothered me a lot was that there's a bunch of people talking to each other and not so much showing what's going on. And yet it still manages to be confusing despite this like constant exposition where there's bits of exposition I felt like were missing. There were parts that I felt needed to be connected so I could understand more what was going on. And then there were other parts that were explained like 4 times in 4 different ways.
Okay, so the original movie was supposed to be 60 minutes, but this movie is 90 minutes long. What story point would you cut out of this to make it the 60-minute movie and possibly a better movie?
Oh, sure. I think I would cut out basically everything about everything about Okabe. I don't think you need him after the kids grow up.
Mhm.
Well, 3 years later.
Yeah.
Should have been like 10 years
Yeah.
later.
Or at least 7.
I
Give
would
him
have Yeah,
7.
I would have said that it's been 10 years. This girl's been in a coma for 10 years, and for some reason this guy's still hung up on it or isn't finding meaning in his life. Hiroki, I mean. Um, but Okabe is just this guy, this one character who's a little bit interesting for a little while that these kids work for, and then we never fucking see him again. Like that's what I would change about this movie because it gets so convoluted and confusing with these like, all right, and now there's some baddies that are Soviet Union people or the National Security Association and like I don't mind seeing a little bit more military walking around. We're like,
Mhm.
oh shit, something's like starting. You can tell that tensions are running high, or maybe like it's just there's something that you can show that the tensions are running high so you don't have that, that entire part where Tokia is like on this ship and we don't know what they're doing
Yeah.
and then it gets shot at by this boat that told them to stop and they're not stopping. I guess like they went over to get some like information. It sounded like it was kind of like doing spy stuff and they were on the other side of whatever the what do you call it? The border?
Yeah. I don't know what that boat mission was, and I don't know how that boat survived. It got shot to shit,
Yeah.
and Takio just gets he gets shot like it looks like
And
he
the
gets shot like 4
looks like
times.
it's shot in the everywhere of
Yeah.
the everything.
Yeah,
At least some broken ribs.
and then we just see him, and he's got a sling on the next time. It's like, "Wait, didn't you get shot like 4 didn't a Tommy gun just blow right through you?"
Why didn't your boat sink? It had massive
That's what
holes
I'm
in it.
saying.
Yeah.
Like, how did that happen?
So that entire section I would just lift. I would just
Yeah.
lift out, completely out. But we would see Takia working as a scientist. Maybe he's still a dick. Who knows? Um, the Okabe story wouldn't matter at all. And then we would still and maybe he would still have information about Sairi. Like maybe Hiroki would still kind of seek him out and try and come find him after finding this letter and ask him and see if he knew anything. And maybe he'd be like, "Oh, well, you should ask your friend, Takia, because he's like the big science man." And then maybe that would happen. I don't know. I thought the Takia's reaction to Hiroki still wanting to kind of fulfill the mission later on in life, his reaction was so over the top. It
Yeah, it was
escalates
extreme.
so quickly. He's like, "Hey man, what if we did that thing we wanted to do as kids?" And he's like, "You fucking what?" And
Yeah.
pulls out
Pulls
a
out a gun,
gun.
shoots he's like tries to shoot the ship that they were working on for years. He puts the gun to Hiroki's head. I'm like, bro, it's just a little plane trip.
Like, let's say that this science thing that he works for now has some like devious other plan. And if he flew to the tower, it would fuck up those plans. And so
Hmm.
now this guy's like, do I like go with the company that I've pledged my loyalty to? Or do I try and do this thing with this childhood friend? Like, where do my loyalties lie? And maybe that could be interesting. And that could be like a character arc thing for that guy. But
Yeah, when Hiroki makes the suggestion like, "Hey, let's fly the plane. Let's build the plane, and maybe we can take Sayuri, and that'll wake her up or something." He just guns out,
yeah.
shoots at the plane, and then
And then they
Hiroki moves it, and then he points it at Hiroki's head. And it could be something where he knows how devastating and dangerous this mission would actually be, but he could just tell
have a
Hiroki that.
conversation, yeah, and then they also get into a fist fight.
Yeah, yeah. And also Hiroki, you can't beat the shit out of a guy that has his arm in a sling that just got shot. Throw a punch, dude.
Yeah, and then, in between these 2 ideas that we talked about, I like when Hiroki goes to visit the room where Sayuri had been kept, but they've moved her to a different
Mm.
hospital,
And then
the mysterious government people.
they have the Your Name magic hour moment.
Yeah, and they have the Your Name magic hour moment, and they go back to that place, that last day that they were, and they both describe as a really, really happy moment, and that from that moment on, everything else was
It
pretty
must have been pretty
terrible.
shitty.
Yeah. That things were really, really awful. And I thought it was nice to kind of remember that they have a connection, or to establish a deeper connection between the two of them that's less just like middle school crush and more like we have this place and we're both connected through something right now. And then I don't understand how Takia suddenly has a change of heart. There's just no explanation for why. There's no explanation for how he ramps up energetically to get to the point to pull out a gun, or how he de-escalates and decides to help after getting punched in the face. Like, I just both of those moments, you're just like, "Yeah, you gotta ease me in and out a little bit."
I have a question about that actually. So I think that the order that it goes in is he does the gun thing with Hiroki and pulls the gun out on him. Then I think in the middle there is when he's with Maki and he steals her badge and he goes to visit uh, Sayuri in the medical facility. And maybe seeing her there causes him to have the change of heart to go back. But is that the order of how things
That
happen?
is the order of how things happen, but it seems like he took Maki's, um, sort of ID
Credential
card,
bag
yeah,
thing.
like, her swipe card. It seems like he took it with the intention of going to get Sayuri and taking her out of there.
Mm, but
Because he's kind of like, I need to do this thing first.
yeah. Yeah, but how does Hiroki get maybe no, he does steal her from there.
I know, I said that that is what happens. You're
Oh,
completely
okay.
right. What I'm saying, you said that he has the idea to take her once he goes and sees her. I think he had the idea to take the badge in order to go and take her. Like, he'd already decided at that moment to go
Oh,
and get
okay.
her.
Yeah, maybe it was like something while he was sitting there and Maki's asking him like, "Oh, what went wrong? What happened?" Because I remember him saying like, "Everything's okay now," and then that's when he steals the badge,
Yeah.
and goes and gets Sayuri, and then he brings her to the airport hangar where Bella, whatever the fuck the airplane's name is.
Bella Cielo.
Yeah, and then they complete the mission, and then they start broing out super hard. It's like, bro, you just pulled a gun out on me. I'm not gonna forgive you that quickly. I'm like, dude, I got my own gun. You fucking try that shit again.
Although not before laughing at him while he's playing violin, but it's kind of like
Oh yeah,
dudes
and then also,
poking fun at each other.
yeah, I mean, Takia calls Hiroki an idiot like 4 times. He also calls him an idiot through a computer program.
He is such a jerk.
Yeah, why are you friends with this guy?
And, playing violins, it's on the cover of this film. I thought this was gonna be about, like, music students.
Nope.
I mean, I guess Sayuri was a music student in middle school, and then Hiroki seems to pick up the violin because it's perfect for a really fucking depressed dude living in an apartment on his own. Um,
So little of this movie concerns itself with violins, though.
and then he plays the violin for, Takia's, like, apparently his amusement, because he just he's like, "Play the violin for me, bro, and then I'll make fun of you while you do that."
Yeah, and then Hiroki's like, "All right, I'll do it," and he's facing away from him. He's like, "Why don't you play it towards me,
But
idiot?"
also, I hate that you're playing it. I just
Yeah, it's
like,
like,
what's this guy's problem? And I thought he was gonna need to play the violin to connect with her or to wake her up or something like that, and
yeah.
it just never becomes a thing.
He also had a different violin in his apartment than the one that he played at the hangar.
How
Maybe he
could
was
you
playing
tell?
because the one that in his apartment was like one of those hollow ones, like Lindsey Sterling
Oh,
has,
yes, I
and
did.
then
Okay.
and
Was
then the
he
one
playing her violin?
that's what I think was happening. Maybe he
Okay.
was trying to awaken her, like you were saying, because we do when he starts playing it, you do get a shot of her, and she's kind of like in her coma,
Yeah.
doing the anime gasps. She's sweating a bunch.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Um, yeah, so at the end of this, they say that war has actually been declared. It's official. I just thought it was funny that all the screens were like, "War is declared." Like that's a screen they have just
Yeah.
in case, you know?
Breaking news, war is declared.
Yeah, the war screensaver. And the they get the but Takia and Hiroki get the plane to work.
Mhm.
They get Sayuri in the back seat, and Hiroki is piloting, and Takia is, rooting them along with his change of heart. And then they fly towards the tower, and you see the war starting. So you see all this gunfire. There's lots of fighter planes, and just a lot of things you wouldn't want to fly into. And
That's directly where Hiroki flies to.
yeah, that's directly where he goes. His kind of party, I guess. And then he goes beyond the clouds, and you can tell that they're in a different world,
Mhm.
and which is represented by an elk
An
who's just
elk?
an elk grazing.
I know, I must have been
You,
taking a
you
note.
yeah, you might have been taking note for the 2.5 seconds that the elk was there.
Yeah, I was like, "What? There's an elk?"
Yeah, I mean, it shows the ground for a short period of time, and it's kind of alpine, and there's a big elk,
Huh.
and then it goes back up to the blue sky and clouds and stuff. And you can tell that Sayuri is trying to wake up out of this dream, and she's struggling to. And you're starting to piece together that some of the dreams that she has are of real things.
Yeah, in
These
the
kind of premonitions that
yeah.
she'd had are kind of coming true now. Um, and then she wakes up.
Yeah, as they get to the top of the tower and they can see the jelly-filled inside, the, Boston cream pie donut of a tower,
Uh-huh.
she wakes up and, Hiroki is so happy. He starts petting her face.
She's also crying tears of joy.
Yeah.
And I feel like we missed something about how Takia was kind of like, all right, you can, like, I'll help you out, but you need to destroy that tower.
Well, I thought that that was the plan the whole time.
Yeah. I mean, I think the original plan was just to go see what was there.
Oh, okay.
But then I think that the whatever sciencey company he's the head, the lead new guy, I think was his official title.
Head new guy.
Head new guy. Okay. Um and I think that they wanted to destroy the tower. But it sounded like they were competing to get information about these parallel worlds. So I guess they have Sayuri, and the Soviet Union has the tower. But then why would her grandpa? I don't know. Anyway, so then he launches a bomb at this tower, and we have a classic Makoto Shinkai music video where
Mhm.
you get, very lyric focused music with a montage of the end of the film. In It's
A
not a full montage.
and also inner monologue going
Oh,
on over
yeah.
top of the music
Very,
video.
very true. And this is when we start to get some inner monologue from her as well. I
Mhm.
guess there was some sprinkling when you start to see her in dreamland, then
Yeah.
you hear her inner monologue. But then towards the end, it's kind of going back and forth between them, like they have this
Connection.
inner dialogue.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, it ends in a big old pretty mushroom cloud.
Yeah, and then that's where we leave it off there. I also thought that this movie was gonna end, like, 3 or 4 times before it did because there's
Me
so many,
too.
like, constant, like, blackout cards, and then they start it again, and then there's another blackout, and you're like, "Is that it? Was that the movie?" And then, we actually got to the movie, and it was like, "Oh, any of those other blackouts would have been just as satisfying," I
Yeah.
feel, because ha it's not like the conclusion of the movie was great. They blew up the tower.
Yeah.
What are the repercussions of that?
We don't
Just no
know.
more parallel universe studies?
No more parallel universe studies. Does something happen to her? We don't know.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah, if the
I
tower blows up, does she die?
I don't know. I wondered about that. And I thought that's what was going to happen. I thought she was like, it's so important that I just tell him that I love him. It's more important than anything else. And I just want that for a moment after I wake up, just to be feeling that moment that I tell him and I finally get to say this thing that's really important to me. And I thought this was gonna be like, "This is so important to me, I'm gonna wake up and the world's gonna blow up," but I'm gonna really, savor that moment where I get to tell the dude I like that I like him.
I mean, I wouldn't put it past Shinkai in Weathering with You. There's
It's
that
true.
3-year flood where he just kills half of Japan or whatever.
That's true.
I
I'm
th
still undecided about whether Makoto Shinkai is pro love or against love. It's like it's a little bit hard to tell if he's saying disaster will come to you if you fully like let yourself go into love, or if he's like, no, actually, love is the most important thing.
Yeah, love is the most important thing or
Nothing
love
else
is the
matters.
worst thing?
Yeah, or the worst thing ever.
Did you at any point think that they were going to sacrifice themselves by, like, flying into the tower or
I mean,
flying into the jelly bit?
I thought
That's
there
what I
was
thought.
no way she was gonna survive. I thought she was dead no matter what.
I thought Hiroki was gonna take her up, and once we see the top of the tower, I was like, "Oh, okay, they reached the top of the tower. They're gonna fly into the middle of it and then just die, and then it'll blow it up or something, and then Takia would be happy," but not that doesn't happen.
Do you think it'd be a cooler ending if, they'd both destroyed the tower, but also kind of gotten trapped into a different parallel world,
Oh,
but they
that
could
would've
be there
been cool.
together?
Yeah.
But then I think in order to motivate that throughout the rest of the film, you would have had something where like baddies were trying to get her back into the evil science place and his life had gone to hell, so there was like nothing for him there anymore. And then it would be this satisfying ending of like, okay, we saved the people and did this stuff. Now we can also live free and not be trapped in these situations that we were in before.
Here's what we should do.
Hmm.
Let's steal the premise of this movie,
Absolutely, I'm down.
rewrite
Whatever
it,
you whatever you say next, I'm down.
rewrite it, and make it better.
Yeah, it'd just be fun. And then sell it to Hollywood for millions of dollars.
Yeah, starring real people.
Yeah.
We'll hire rad wimps.
No, we will not. That's in my contract. That's literally a line in it, and you have to sign there. Um, I've got a question for you.
Oh boy, here we go.
Is this sci-fi or fantasy?
This, I will say, is ooh, this is tough. Because the dream stuff is what makes me think it's fantasy. But then there's a lot of, he was the
They
new
really
science
did
guy.
explain how the dream stuff is very sciencey.
Yeah, but
Like,
but that's still
I can't
fantastical.
believe I literally was like, "This is the one time I'm gonna be like, is a Makoto Shinkai film sci-fi or fantasy?" And Joe's gonna be like, "Oh, sci-fi,
Yeah,
obviously."
no, I
And
mean,
you're still a little bit in the fantasy side of
well, I
things.
would say like it's 80% sci-fi, 20% fantasy just because of the dream stuff.
Mm,
Like I know that the one lady, she studies dreams and that's her field of research, and then Takia is the new head science guy and there's a military stuff going on. But when you get into like dreams and her having premonitions and stuff like that,
I think they're trying to
that's where the
offer a
fantasy,
I think they're trying to offer a scientific explanation for how precognition or premonitions are a possibility.
yeah, because of the parallel universes and everything.
Yeah,
I
so
will
I
I will
think
accept that.
okay.
But again, I still say like 80% sci-fi,
What?
then 20% fantasy.
But I've just explained how the dream part of it is also sci-fi.
Yeah, but
Can we go 90-10? Will you give me that?
no, look, 80-20. I would say that yes, that's more sci-fi. That's a sci-fi. If you were just like rounding,
85-15?
8 out of 10, you round up to 10, and that would make it a
8.5 out
sci-fi.
of 10?
That would make it a
I'm
sci-fi movie.
negotiating with you now. All right, fine. Even if you agree with the point that there is a sci-fi explanation for what the dreams are doing, you still think that the dreams give it 20% fantasy?
Yeah,
Okay.
but I would still say that makes it more of a that's more of a sci-fi.
I actually think this is 100% fantasy.
Yeah, right.
No, I don't. I really wanted to sell you on
Yeah,
that,
you
though.
were not going to. After you just argued with me like, "It's sci-fi." And I'm like, "Okay." And then you're like, "Actually, I think it's 100% fantasy." I'm like, "Well,
Oh, I should do that another time.
yeah, you're
I was
not
like,
pulling the wool over
playing
my
some
eyes,
really intense
lady.
devil's advocate
Yeah.
before I even made my own real point.
Yeah.
It's a yeah, it's a form of debate I've learned. You argue the other side's point first before you're making your own. Um,
I thought that the sound design in this was bad.
Terrible. Yeah.
I think the voice acting was bad.
Do you think Makoto Shinkai also did the Foley?
Dude, that some of the sound effects when people were
Very hammy.
so bad and just like very stock. Like I've
Yes,
heard them
absolutely.
everywhere
Yeah.
else. And I didn't think that the soundtrack was very good at all when it was there. Like the violin song that's throughout the movie. I
It's
hated it.
fine.
I
Yeah, I
hated
thought it
it.
was fine.
I hated it.
I know.
Yeah, but
You've mentioned.
you said words while I was saying it. I wanted to make sure that people heard how much I did not like that. Just didn't feel like it. I don't know. This is also another one of those, like you said earlier, it's humorless.
Mm.
There's no bit of joy. It's just all so sad and melancholy.
There's some interesting things. There is some action. Most of it is fairly unmotivated. I I just think that there's so many things about this that miss the mark, but
could have been good.
could have been good. It could have been rewritten. We'll rewrite it.
That's what I'm
Obviously,
saying.
yes, we'll rewrite it. We'll make it much better.
When we rewrite it, it will be
Yeah.
a better movie. Be on the lookout.
Well, I think we should crank our amps.
Yeah. You have any final thoughts, or is that it? Were you cranking them?
Let me go down my little list. At some point, I just wrote, if she wakes up, she fucks up the tower's shit.
At some point, I wrote, "I'm falling asleep a lot."
Yeah, and then you did. No, let's do it. Mine's a 6 for this movie. Because I'm just going halfway because I think it was halfway there with how cool some of the ideas were, and I liked where it was going with it. And then it lost 6 points for failing miserably at that. And that's my score for it.
I'm giving it a 3.5.
Okay.
It's not a good sign if I fall asleep during it.
But how would it compare to like Colorful for you?
I'd say it's kind of on par with Colorful. Colorful at least had a story that I could
Oh,
follow.
God.
I don't know. I don't remember what I gave 5 centimeters per second, but I felt like this was worse than that. 5 centimeters per second had a story that I could follow.
I like this more than 5 centimeters per second.
All right, well, good for you. I don't.
Sorry, I didn't know you didn't want to know.
Yeah, one day we're gonna have to do like a ranking of the Shinkai movies.
Yeah.
But this would be very low on my ranking. I just, but I also, it was his first feature film, and I see where he was going and how this in his later films, like where he was starting and like the genesis of a lot of his ideas and where he was going.
Yeah.
And that's pretty cool to see like those see the groundwork that he was laying to build
Sure.
on. Like I said earlier, that doesn't necessarily mean that this is a very good movie.
Right. Well, that wraps up Makoto Shinkai on the Anime Movie Podcast, unless he makes another movie real soon.
Until he makes another. I mean, he's
Until.
definitely going to make another movie. You think he's retiring?
No.
Yeah, no.
No. Yeah, that's the last Makoto Shinkai film on the Anime Movie Podcast until he makes another feature film, because we have now done all of them.
Mm-hmm. Except for maybe short films, but fuck that.
Yeah.
We might do that sometime in the future.
Sure.
These are the heavy hitters.
I did try to watch the first film he ever made.
Or the cat one?
The cat one.
Yeah.
I couldn't watch all of it. It's only 5 minutes long and I couldn't finish it.
We'll have to review that one.
We'll have to review that.
Is that number 7 on the ranking?
At least. Yeah. Or at most. I don't know.
All right. Well, thank you very much for listening, everybody. You can Email us if you would like. It's the anime movie podcast at gmail.com. Follow us on social media at the anime movie podcast. Leave a rating and a review, please, and subscribe and all that jazz. We have a YouTube channel. Just search the anime movie podcast and it'll come up. We do a bunch of fun videos that are, clips from this podcast. Sometimes we do other ones where it's just independent YouTube specific ones. So a little tease for you, a little enticing thing. And they have like animations and you can see what we're talking about in those clips. So yeah, that does it for Makoto Shinkai February.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Anime Movie Podcast. You can follow us on Instagram at the Anime Movie Podcast, and you can reach out via email at the Anime Movie Podcast at gmail.com. Please subscribe, rate, and review, and tell a friend. Thanks. Have a good one. Bye.